Food. 80% of this office is school lunches and Meals on Wheels. And it's whether we get good, high-quality, healthy food to our kids and our old folks, or if they're having to eat processed junk in a package that got shipped here from out of state. And that's what I want to change when I'm Ag Commissioner. And then kind of the bonus issue you get from me is I'm a cannabis lawyer. So when it comes to expanding medical cannabis and legalizing marijuana, I'm going to help Beto and the others write that policy so we have a good program in this state. And I want to say a little thing about our whole ticket. We have a great ticket this year, all the way down. Mike Collier for Lieutenant Governor. My friend Rochelle Garza for Attorney General, who's as fierce as they come. Janet Dudding for Comptroller. Jay Clayburgh for Land Commissioner. And Luke Warford for Railroad Commissioner. So tell your friends, get them out to vote, leave no stone unturned. We've got to turn out every vote we can if we're going to take this state back, fight back against the corruption. And I'm not just talking about that quid pro quo scammy corruption. I'm talking about that corruption of using an office just to promote your own political career and not caring who you hurt. That is the biggest thing that's wrong with this state. And as an example of that, Greg Abbott blowing $4 billion on the border for his political performance, hollering about immigrants when we're not supporting our rural hospitals. And truth be told, Texas agriculture needs those workers. It's nuts. We're cutting ourselves off at our own knees. So get out there, vote, turn your friends out to vote. And with that, I'm going to introduce our leader at the top of the ticket, Beto O'Rourke.
Thank you so much. All right, San Angelo, how we doing? Good to be with you. Muy buenas tardes. Gracias por estar con nosotros. We'll try tonight's town hall meeting in English and Spanish. See how we do, right? As I came in, someone said, hey, I don't speak English, but I came to find out what you're about and how we're going to work together, how we're going to make this a better state. I didn't ask her if she was a Republican or a Democrat. Don't want to know who she prays to or how she loves. I just love the fact that she's here in Tom Green County, is going to be part of this effort, and is going to help us to win this election on November 8th. Le agradezco a todos. You know, so often we define ourselves by who we're against, or who we don't like, or who we're supposed to be afraid of. And I thought maybe tonight we could start out by who we're for and what we're about and how we bring each other together. And speaking of bringing each other together, let me thank those who made this meeting tonight possible. We acknowledged our new county chair, Mercedes, Shirley, who got us kicked off, who's amazing, Susan Hayes, our next Ag Commissioner. But the very first time I came to Tom Green County, it was thanks to David Curry, who's right here in the back of the room, who said, hey, Beto, do not sleep on this part of Texas. You need to show up. And I can't tell you, we've been here 4 times just in this campaign. I don't know what statewide candidates show up to communities like yours or mine in El Paso 4 times, and won't be the last time, by the way, right now. That all started with David Curry. One other person who's been fighting mightily for communities like San Angelo and the adjoining counties is a guy named John Mark Hogue, who I think is here. I watched him walk in. He's got the 134 pack. And again, he's not railing against Republicans. He's saying, hey, Democrats. And he happens to be a Democrat. Remember us? You used to fight for us. You used to stand up for us. You used to show up in our communities and listen to us and seek to understand us and then deliver for us once you're in a position of public trust. Where'd y'all go? And so he's making sure that he brings folks like me, like Susan, like Janet, like Jay, like Luke, like Mike, like Rochelle, to come out here and listen to you tonight. So let me begin by who we are for. The state is so divided. This country's so polarized right now. I'm not going to tell you how bad the other guy is. I'm not going to enter into that game of fear and hatred. I'm gonna describe who we wanna do this for at the end of the day, okay? So I start with, because my wife Amy and I just sent our 3 kids off to school 2 weeks ago. That's how early the school year starts in El Paso, August 1. A sophomore who's gonna be 16 in November. So if you're driving in El Paso, watch out, okay? His younger sister's starting high school, she's a freshman, and it's awesome that the two of them are there together and getting closer as they're both at this high school that I went to when I was their same age, and their younger brother who's just started middle school, 6th grade. We know, especially because Amy, and when I can, I am, are so involved in their educations. We never miss a parent-teacher conference. Those teachers have Amy's cell phone, and if our kids are acting up or they need a little help, and they say, hey, when Henry comes home from school, you may want to work on this issue. Really kind of help him through this thing that he's having a hard time catching in class. We go to school board meetings, make sure those trustees know how we feel about the issues that are most important to us. Not only are we parents, but like all of you, we are property taxpayers. We want to make sure that what we're paying in to the highest taxing district in our county is producing the value and the return that we're looking for. But we realize at the end of the day, when we care about our kids' education, your kids' education, and the future of this state, we can invest billions of dollars in the latest technology or the nicest new school buildings or sports stadiums or all that other jazz. And it's important. I don't mean to diminish it or say that it's not a factor in our kids' success. But that classroom educator, that librarian, that school counselor who today has a student to counselor ratio of like 600 to 1, 800 to 1, 1,000 to 1 in some school districts. That school bus driver who may be the very last person to see that kid before they walk into that home, or the first person to see them on Monday morning at the beginning of the week and say, you know what? Something's not right with Joey. I don't think this guy's getting enough calories in his system. I'm gonna check in and make sure he's okay. There may be a situation at home and I wanna make sure that I'm there for him. That teacher who's working a second job, maybe a third job right here in San Angelo because your teachers are underpaid against the national average of $15,500 a year. That's where you are below par. Not to the highest teacher in America, okay? That would be tens of thousands. You're $15,500 paid less than just the average teacher in America. And I remind my friends who are not teachers or haven't listened to a great educator in Texas recently, when they're serving your beer at that bar or waiting on your table or fixing your tire at the auto body repair shop, they're not doing it for kicks or spending cash. They're trying to meet the note on their mortgage. They're trying to put food on the table. They're trying to fill that prescription for their kid. We don't pay them enough right now for them to be able to make ends meet on just one job. And that teacher, out of her own pocket and out of his own pocket, they'll be paying to decorate these classrooms that these kids are walking into right now. You know that. When one of the O'Rourke kids shows up and forgot his notebook or his pens or his paper, again, out of their own pocket, they'll pay for the school supplies. But they're also there out of their own pocket to pay for that third meal of the day. You're on free and reduced breakfast and lunch. Great, we got you covered. But when you need to burn some calories to do that homework that we assigned you, what if there's no food in the cupboard at home? We have more kids who are food insecure in the state of Texas than any other state in the union. It's the teacher. She knows better than anyone else that kid needs some help. The kid who shows up in the same shabby clothes, maybe same pair of dirty jeans, same dirty t-shirt, same dirty underwear, probably day in, day out, and he's kind of hanging his head low, he's embarrassed, he's ashamed, he doesn't look as good as the other kids, doesn't have the money that their parents have. Again, out of her own pocket by Monday, maybe there's a new set of clothes for him so he can hold his head high and learn with pride just alongside those other kids. For our children, for the future of this state, for getting that return on the tax dollars that we pay in, we've got to do a better job of treating these educators with the respect and the dignity that they deserve, that they've earned, and that all of us owe them. That's who I'm for. And if you're a Republican teacher, I'm for you. A Democratic teacher, I'm for you. An independent teacher, I'm for you. A teacher who's never voted and is not politically aligned and never will be, I'm for you too. But It's more than just words. It's the actions that all of us can take through our government to really demonstrate that. And I want to lay a few on you. What if we paid this teacher here in San Angelo enough so she didn't have to work that second or third job? She just focuses on that one job, unlocking that lifelong love of learning in the head of that child in front of her. What about when that teacher retires, he hasn't seen a cost of living adjustment since 2004 in the state of Texas. You think costs have gone up a little bit since 2004 in the state of Texas? Costs have gone up 9% just in the last year. You're paying more in property taxes. You're paying more on your utility bill. You're paying more in every aspect of life. When incoming prospective teachers see how their grandparents are being treated, they're making decisions right now. I'm not going to go into that classroom. I'm not going to live in poverty in my retirement. I'm not going to struggle with 2 jobs in that classroom. So ensuring that we have a cost of living adjustment for those retired teachers every single year going forward, that makes sense too. But for those in the classroom right now, here's what you've told me. 2 years of pandemic, 2 years of learning loss for those kids in front of you, 2 years, and this is not hyperbole to use this word, 2 years of trauma for kids who've lost a grandparent or who've been isolated at home or whose folks have lost their job and are having a hard time making ends meet, bouncing from one house, one apartment, one friend's couch to another. What you have told me, those of you in the classroom, is, hey, Beto, right now, I'm just trying to keep these kids alive. And so I don't need another high stakes, high pressure, standardized test that in no way will effectively measure the potential inside of that child or the effort that I'm expending. Let's cancel the STAR test in the state of Texas and replace it with something that actually works. And let's ask those classroom educators and those parents and these kids for what should follow that STAR test. And the best way to organize that is, after we win this election, after I get to serve as your governor, is to appoint a classroom teacher as our next TEA commissioner. That's how we're going to get some respect back in the classroom going forward. That threat of vouchers that hits rural Texas harder than any other part of Texas. For sure, in San Angelo, if vouchers actually worked and you got that voucher, there's a private school you might be able to afford your kid to. Actually, honestly, that voucher would cover maybe a percentage of your kid's private school education. You're gonna have to cough up the rest. It's gonna drain tax dollars out of that public school classroom, away from that educator, away from her pupils. But think about these surrounding counties where there's only one school and it happens to be a public school. We voucher their schools, we drain their classrooms. That money's going to San Angelo, it's going to Houston, it's going to Dallas, it's going everywhere except for where their kids need it. I tell you what, there may be a lot that we're going to disagree on as Texans, and Amy and I can vouch for this. We've been married for 17 years. No two people will agree on everything all the time, right? But on this, on public education, find me the person who's going to take the other side of the argument. And if we could get past the culture wars, the hatred, the division, the incompetence, the corruption, the chaos that defines our state government in Texas right now, imagine what we could do in public ed. Let me tell you another person I'm for. I'm aware that many of you have served at Goodfellow or up the road in Abilene at Dias, or put your lives in the line in some other capacity for this country in uniform. We boast more veterans than probably any other state in the union. And yet, despite being the 9th largest economy on the planet, tonight, far too many of those veterans will be sleeping on the side of the road in the great state of Texas, underneath a bridge, on a park bench, when we're safe at home, laying our head down in our comfortable bed. We don't fail them for lack of resources. We fail them for lack of political will and follow through. Not enough to say thank you for your service, although we thank you for your service. Far better to demonstrate that in the actions that we take. Here are some things that I've heard by visiting with veterans, including those of you who came out to our Veterans Town Hall right here in San Angelo a couple of months ago. 1, let us spare no expense. Let us move any obstacle in our path to make sure that every veteran has housing. When they do, their ability to pursue a job or finish their education or get the care that they need becomes that much easier. Try doing that when you don't have a permanent address, or when you can't take a shower, or when you yourself have been wearing the same set of dirty clothes day in and day out. For those like Carlos Fuentes, who is Cynthia Cano's father. Cynthia Cano, as you all know from the campaign, is our road manager. She sets up meetings like these. She guarantees the success of this effort one day, one community, one voter at a time. Her dad is part of this extraordinary generation that when in the 1960s and early 70s called up to serve, gladly did so. Went off to fight a war that this country never understood. Came back not to ticker tape parades, not to pats on the back, at the best to shrugs of indifference, at worst to the outright hatred of their fellow Americans, and yet nonetheless put their heads down, raised their families, raised amazing people like Cynthia Fuentes Cano, and also started businesses that created jobs for others. But what they experienced in that indignity of their return back from service extended long after they touched ground here in America. For 40 years, 4 decades, this country waited to treat their exposure to Agent Orange as a presumptive condition for the cancers that were consuming them, from the diseases from which they were dying. 40 years for us to get our act together and do the right thing by those who are willing to lose their lives for us. I mentioned Mr. Fuentes in this great generation because as I meet those of you coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan and Syria and Somalia and Yemen and all these wars that we're fighting still today, and you tell me about your exposure to toxic burn pits, to the medical waste and toxins and chemicals that we were burning up and you were breathing in, and now that you're back in San Angelo, you're having a hard time breathing where you work or with your family, and you're wondering what's going to happen to you. It is that Vietnam-era veteran, along with the current veteran, who's first in line to say, hey, we got to do something about this toxic burn pit exposure. And while I'm glad to see some progress at the national level, I propose that right here in the state of Texas, we stand up our own toxic burn pit registry to connect every returning veteran with the care that they need to make sure that no generation is treated with the indignity that the Vietnam era was treated with, right? Let's get that right in Texas right now. And lastly, for these veterans who have told us, hey, Beto, when I can get into the VA, the care is great. I've got no complaints. But sometimes, for my PTSD, my traumatic brain injury, they're all too quick to prescribe me an opioid, which I worry that I'm going to become addicted to, which I see other veterans dying from right now. There's this substance that I'd like to use, but if I have possession of it, I'm a criminal in the eyes of the law here. It's the one thing that relieves my symptoms, allows me to sleep, returns my appetite, makes life a little bit more normal for me. What can we do about it? I propose that we legalize cannabis in the state of Texas to make sure that we don't treat anybody who's trying to take care of themselves like a common criminal, that we expunge the arrest records for those who've served time for cannabis possession in the state of Texas going forward, and make sure that this is the best state for military retirees and veterans to come back home to. Someone else I'm for is that school child who's returning to the classroom right now, who's looking at you and me, their parents and grandparents, and saying, hey, folks, I'm not dumb. I recognize that 12 weeks ago, 19 kids who look just like me were slaughtered in their classroom. Their 2 teachers who'd already sacrificed the best years of their lives to connect with those kids were willing to lose their lives to try to protect them. But they were up against a weapon first engineered and designed and sold to the United States military for use in Vietnam, to strike and kill an enemy soldier at 500 yards, to penetrate a steel helmet and to knock him down dead. That same weapon used against kids at 5 feet with no helmet on their head. Only way you can identify their bodies is by the shoes that they are wearing or DNA swab if you can get one. Now those kids are asking us, and for me, that's a judgment I fear more than any other on this earth. In heaven, it's a different story, but on this earth, it's my kids. They're asking us, what are you going to do about it? Are we supposed to sacrifice ourselves for your inaction, or for what scores political points, or for a special interest or a lobby who's making money off the fact that 5 of the worst mass shootings in U.S. history have taken place in the last 5 years right here in the state of Texas, Uvalde being just but the latest. Here's what I propose for those kids. We're all Texans. We all grew up with firearms in the household. I'm no exception. My great uncle Raymond, who was a sheriff's deputy, he was captain at the El Paso County Jail. He was also the Marksman's Award winner in that department. So he insisted on teaching me and my two sisters how to use a gun and the responsibility of owning one. It's probably your education as well. It's the same one that we're given to our 3 kids today in our home. But the fact that in Texas, an 18-year-old can walk into a gun store and buy not one, but 2 of those AR-15s and hundreds of rounds of ammunition, and it is perfectly legal. The fact that he can be sending signals in so many directions so strongly that his friends call him the school shooter before he ever walks into a school and shoots anyone, and we could do nothing about it. Well, that's an indictment on all of us, not one political party, not just the gun manufacturers, not even just that man who perpetrated this god-awful crime and tragedy, on all of us until we change it and make it better. These are some things that you have proposed as I've listened to you across the state. Doesn't come from me, doesn't come from my political party. It comes from Texans, gun owners, non-gun owners alike. 1, at a minimum, let's raise the age of purchase for an AR-15 from 18 to 21. Will it stop every instance of violence with this weapon of war? It will not. But let not that admission stop us from saving lives and stopping a tragedy like Uvalde, because some of you will ask, and this is a legitimate question, hey, Beto, that sounds great, but criminals don't follow the law. This shooter in Uvalde did not try to acquire those AR-15s when he was 16 or when he was 17. He patiently waited till his 18th birthday, literally, and then went in, because that was the law of the land. Raise it to 21, and in that instance, at least, we would have purchased 3 more years for some kind of intervention in that young man's life. A red flag law is another idea I've heard as I've traveled the state of Texas. This says, if you have that firearm and you're talking about killing yourself, killing your spouse, your boyfriend, your girlfriend, somebody at school, somebody at the workplace, people in your community, through due process, we can intervene, remove that firearm from the household until legitimate concerns have been addressed, and then return that firearm to its rightful owner. Will this work? I mentioned in Uvalde, this guy was sending off signals, red flags, that his friends in the community were reading. There's just no law in the books to allow law enforcement to intervene. When 23 of our neighbors in El Paso were gunned down in a Walmart the Saturday before school started in 2019 by a guy who said he was coming to repel the invasion of Hispanics, this invasion that he's warned about repeatedly by the former president and the current governor. When that AK-47 comes in, his mom picks up the phone and calls the Allen Police Department. I have no idea what my son needs with this firearm. And she may have signaled some other distress in the home. Allen PD says to her, you know what? There is nothing we can do. Good luck, you're on your own. He drives at 650 miles, kills 23 people in a matter of minutes in a town where nearly 1 million people strong in El Paso, in a town that doesn't lose 20 people to murder on an average year. Yeah, a red flag law would have stopped that. Last one. It's called a universal background check. You might say, look, Beto, I just bought a firearm from a gun shop owner. I had to go through a background check. And you'd be right. But if you buy it from a private seller, you don't have to do the same thing because we don't have a universal background check. A month after the El Paso shooting in 2019, a guy goes into a gun shop in the Midland-Odessa community, tries to buy an AR-15, doesn't pass a background check. Great, it works. But because we don't have a universal background check, he goes to a private seller, buys the exact same firearm, no questions asked. Nobody in that community is the wiser or the safer for it, turns around and uses it to kill 8 people in that community. Ladies and gentlemen, I have met the survivors of every single one of these tragedies. They're Republicans, they're Democrats. They're folks in some cases who have never voted or considered themselves politically involved before. They are begging us to do something. They don't want any other family to experience the grief and the sorrow and the loss that they will live through every single day for the rest of their lives. So I propose, on behalf of our kids in those classrooms, that we step up and do the right thing, defend the Second Amendment, and better protect the lives of the people in our lives. You all with me on this? Can we get this done? We're Texans. We're capable of this. Last couple of things I want to say. I'm for every single one of us, including those who are not fortunate in life, or have had some setbacks, or who are working their hearts out at $7.25 an hour, and you can't work one of those jobs to get ahead. You can work two, and maybe you get to even, but maybe you can't afford to see a doctor, or take your kid to a mental health care provider, or fill that prescription for insulin, and you have diabetes. We are dead last in the country, the least insured state in America. That means more children in Texas have died of diabetes than any other state. It means that we rank 51st, actually, behind every state in the District of Columbia in mental health care access. You know who our largest provider of mental health care services is in this state? It's the county jail system. People with schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, clinical depression, all too often who are also uninsured and untreated, will get arrested on purpose to be taken to the one place where they're guaranteed any kind of care at all, as insufficient as it may be. And it's incredibly expensive, $120 a night to you and to me as the property taxpayers in our counties, whether it's Tom Green or El Paso. There's a solution to that one as well. It's this program that we came up with. And I would argue that we in rural Texas came up with in 1965 through the first Texas president, Lyndon Baines Johnson. He just said, look, you should not be so unlucky or so poor that you cannot be healthy enough or well enough to live to your full potential. We just want you to flourish. No handouts, no giveaways. We just want to make sure that you're okay. So he signed into law the Medicaid Act in the summer of 1965. And there's this deal on the table today in Washington, D.C. And get this, sounds too good to be true, but I've checked it out and it is. They will send us back $10 billion a year, every single year going forward. Not free money, not stuff that grows on trees or falls out of the sky. It is our income taxes that we in Texas paid up to D.C. that they're holding on to. They'll send it back to us if we'll take it. If not, there are a lot of other states who are happy to get in on this deal. Lest you think this is some Democratic Party ploy, Louisiana, Arkansas, Oklahoma, New Mexico, our four border states, three of them with Republican governors, have all taken Medicaid expansion. They just want to make sure that the people who live and work in their state are able to do more for themselves and do more for all of us. And here's the kicker. When we win this election, when we expand Medicaid, when we stand up some of these closed rural hospitals, 16 of them have closed down since Greg Abbott has been elected governor. When we make sure that you're no longer in rural Texas driving hundreds of miles to be able to see a doctor or a mental health care provider or go to a clinic, not only will we be able to do all that good work, not only will we be able to train up and hire more of our own. Say you grew up in Tom Green County, can't afford a medical school education. What if Texas said, we'll pay for it on the condition that you move back to Tom Green County after medical school and practice medicine there for 6 years and take care of the people who nurtured your success in the first place? Not only can we do all that, but the kicker is that we can lower your property taxes, because when that untreated diabetic who hasn't been able to afford insulin, which has been around for 102 years and costs nothing to produce, but will cost you hundreds of dollars, if not more than $1,000 out of pocket if you don't have insurance. When their suffering finally becomes too much for them to bear, they will take themselves to your county hospital here. They will go in. The outcomes will be much worse than if they'd had preventative care all along. And the care will be exponentially more expensive to provide. And though they don't have a dime to their name, or an insurance card in their wallet or their purse, that bill doesn't go away. It just gets distributed amongst everybody here in this room in the form of higher property taxes. Medicaid expansion takes care of uncompensated indigent care that you're paying for right now. So imagine that bargain if we'll just take yes for an answer. And you know what? Democrats love this. Republicans love this. There's a critical number of Republicans in the state legislature who will get behind this. All we're missing is a governor who has the political will and leadership to get this done. So why don't we make sure that we expand Medicaid in the state of Texas for everyone who needs to be able to see a doctor and get that care. And lastly, I want to say this. I'm for everyone who is under attack right now in the state of Texas. There are a lot of folks. I think about the kids in CPS care, 32,000 of them in the foster care system in Texas right now. Unfortunately, it is the worst run in the United States of America. And to all my CPS caseworkers who are here right now, it's not because of you. You're literally doing the Lord's work. You're not receiving enough pay. You're not having enough colleagues in there helping you out. You've been neglected by your state government and your governor. And when you go to the office tonight, there's a good chance there are children sleeping in the hallways. They're on the desks. They're underneath the desks. In the world's 9th largest economy, we've lost the lives of 100 kids in our custody, in our care, just since the year 2020. Hundreds more have been trafficked and sexually abused as our governor continues to privatize care for the most vulnerable. I want you to know, you don't have a political action committee. You don't have big donors who elevate your profile. Most of you cannot vote, but we're for you nonetheless. If you're transgender and you're in the state of Texas, I want you to know that we've got your back. We're proud of you and the fact that you live in this community. And at a time that your governor is threatening to go after your parents for child abuse and take you from the home in which you live and turn you over to Child Protective Services and that foster care system, I just want you to know that we've got your back. And that goes for other members of the LGBTQ community in Texas. When you have a Don't Say Gay bill being proposed for this next legislative session, when they're talking about ending marriage equality in the state of Texas or reviving our sodomy laws, I'm not making this stuff up. It sounds stranger than fiction, but read the concurring opinion written by Justice Clarence Thomas to the Dobbs decision just a couple of months ago. That's what they're coming after next, and it's going to be right here in the state of Texas. If you're an immigrant, if you're a dreamer, if you come here from another country and you're sick and tired of having your governor describe you as an invading force who's coming to take over, when all you're really doing is looking for that job in the cotton gin that no one here is willing to work, all you're doing is willing to pick onions that no one else will take on, all you're doing is filling some of the highest paid, highest technology jobs that we can't train for in this country right now, I just want you to know that Republicans and Democrats alike, rural and urban, we're going to come together to rewrite our immigration laws based on Texas values, to fulfill our needs and our priorities, to reflect the fact that we are a state of immigrants and so successful for that. And lastly, before I turn it over to you all, if you're a woman in Texas, I want you to know when we win this, you're going to be making your own decisions about your own body, your own health care, and your own future. It's the way it should be. Protection for that right was won by Texas women. Jane Roe, Linda Coffey, Sarah Weddington, born and raised in bright blue Abilene, Texas, successfully argued that case before an all-male United States Supreme Court 50 years ago. No one came to the rescue in 1973 to save the women of Texas. It was the women of Texas who stepped up, stood up to be counted, fought for themselves and for every generation that followed. If it was the women of Texas who won it for us in 1973, ladies and gentlemen, it's going to be the women of Texas who win it again in 2022. We are going to do this. Thank you for coming out here tonight. Cynthia Cano, Carlos's amazing daughter, has got another microphone, and as she looks for the first question in this town hall, in this forum, I just want to close with this. There are some brilliant people who are wearing these yellow construction vests around the hall tonight, and they will sign you up to host a canvas or a block walk. They'll sign you up to go to a canvas or a block walk, and all that means when you sign up is that you're going to go knock on the doors of the voters in Tom Green County who are going to decide the outcome of this election. We have some pretty good data. I'm not going to send you up on the door of a 100% Greg Abbott voter who never misses an election and is going to, vote for him hell or high water. What I'd like to do is put you on the doors of people who would be with us, but for the extraordinary level of voter suppression and voter intimidation that we have in the state of Texas right now. 7 million people who were eligible to vote in 2020, arguably the most consequential presidential election of our lifetimes, didn't cast a ballot. 7 million, and there are tens of thousands of them in this county right now. Biggest reason they gave when asked why they didn't vote in 2020 was that no one asked them to. They're waiting for you literally. I will get you on their doors. And if you're willing to sweat a little bit and walk a little and work a little, we're going to be able to reach them. And wouldn't it be nice if, because of your effort, talking to these folks in the yellow vests who will sign you up for free, they become the margin of victory on the night of November 8th when we win this. You all ready? Let's get this done. We're going to win this election, and we're going to do it together with the power of the people in this room. Cynthia Connell's got our first question.
How, as Democrats, do we get a referendum on the ballot for reproductive health care, just like Kansas? How can we do this?
Love this question. The short, sad answer to this is there's no ability to do a referendum in the state of Texas unless you have the current legislature and the current governor willing to help us to put that on the ballot. Don't hold your breath, right? But there is a referendum on November 8th, and it's called this governor's race. And the same way in which the people of Kansas, a state that voted for Trump at a much higher percentage than the state of Texas, came out 60-40 for reproductive health care freedom, exceeded every forecast in terms of turnout. They said it would be X. It was like 2X or 2.5X or 3X that showed up in this election. Our referendum, if you care about yourself or your daughter or your sister or anybody else in this state able to make their own reproductive health care decisions, if you realize that we are leading the developed world in the rate of maternal mortality, 3 times as deadly for black women in the state of Texas, because when you make it impossible to get an abortion, you also in many of our counties make it impossible to get a cervical cancer screening or family planning help or just to see a doctor at all in the least insured state in America. If it horrifies you that they're talking about checking your travel documents if you're of childbearing age and you seek to leave the borders of our state, or they're already going to prosecute, they say, those companies who fund the out-of-state travel for their female employees, this election is your referendum. And let's reach out to those who may not agree with us on every issue, but see how critical and existential this one is. This is their election. Knocking on their doors is how we connect to them, bring them out, and win this at the end of the day. Thanks for the great question. Ms. Cano.
Here I come.
Don't know where here is?
Right behind you. I'm sorry. I'm going to get this gentleman right here.
Hey, thanks for coming out.
How you doing, sir?
Doing good.
I'm a burn survivor in Texas, and I was in an apartment complex that was unsafe and up to current fire codes in the state of Texas. I was burned 68% of my body, and tragically 5 young lives were lost that night. How can you, as governor of Texas, make sure that when we lay our heads down at night, we live in a safe place?
I'm so glad that you're here and that you're willing to share this story. And I'm so sorry for what you've experienced, but I'm so impressed that you came out and you're here not for yourself, you're here for others. And you want to make sure that future Texans don't experience the same thing that happened that night. So what, my friend Janet Dudding, who's running for comptroller, often says, and I'll borrow this line from her, is that in a state where we need watchdogs, far too often we have lapdogs. When you have the level of conflict of interest and downright corruption that we see in the state of Texas, it helps to explain some of the outcomes that otherwise would be inexplicable. I'll give you an example. It's somewhat related, but how in the world, in the energy capital of the world, can you not keep the power on last February and the lights go out and the heat stops running and pretty soon your pipes freeze before they burst and drench your home and ruin your floorboards and your drywall and your ceiling? How did we lose the lives of 700 people who expected to be able to live through the night but died of hypothermia or themselves were consumed by fire as they lit their furniture aflame to try to keep warm because it's the only way they thought they were going to be able to survive? When you have a public utility commission that is comprised of the cronies of the current governor, when you have regulatory agencies that are more beholden to those they're supposed to oversee than to the public interest, when you don't have folks fighting for the little guy and the little gal, something that John Mark Hogue will tell you Democrats used to show up in Tom Green County to do, this is the consequence of our inaction and the status quo. So we have to make sure that at every level of government, local, state, federal, and otherwise, that we have the highest levels of accountability. and that there is justice, because without it, my prediction is we continue to have these same kinds of tragedies going forward. I'm going to wager that you, because of your question, have done some research on this issue. You know some of the things, some of the specific concrete steps we could take. I'm going to ask you before the night's over that I get your contact information, that you and I can have a conversation either here or by phone. I would love to follow your lead on this. Very grateful to you coming out. Appreciate it. Thank you so much. It's great.
Right in the middle.
Hi. Everything you've talked about tonight is critical. I'm curious to know your ideas and thoughts on voters' rights. You briefly mentioned it, but without that and without rolling back some of the restrictions that were imposed over this past year and a half, we go nowhere.
Eso. Yeah. We sure do. Yeah. One of the times that we came to San Angelo, I think was last June, Cynthia and I were traveling with others to try to make sure that we were all focused on the right to vote and the fact that our democracy is under attack, and nowhere more so than in the state of Texas. This is the toughest state in the union in which to cast a ballot. It's the toughest state in the union in which to register. And after last year's election laws, some might call them voter suppression laws, it became a lot harder. And to be clear, it's not hard for everyone and not in the same ways. As it has always happened, you know, when Democrats were in power at the beginning of the 20th century, it was Democrats who tried to stay in power and grow their power by disenfranchising some Texans. 1923, and I apologize for the history lesson, but I think this is pertinent. 1923, state legislature says if you're black, you can't vote. They didn't say how many jelly beans are in the jar, or can you recite the state constitution, or here's a literacy test, or we're going to jack your poll tax. It literally said in black and white, if you're African American, you cannot participate in the Democratic primary in Texas. Back in 1923, there was only one primary, literally, in Texas. There were not enough Republicans to muster a primary in certain years. So whoever won the Democratic primary for county commissioner, for justice of the peace, for Congress, for governor, would hold that office come November. 1924, Dr. Lawrence Nixon, black physician in El Paso, pays his poll tax, goes into fire station number 5, where he'd never missed an election going all the way back to 1910. The election judges know him by name. Hey, Dr. Nixon, he waves to them, presents his poll tax. They say, hey, Dr. Nixon, you know we can't let you vote. And he says, I know you can't, but I've got to try. So he takes this case to the federal bench in the Western District of Texas, loses, appeals it all the way up to the United States Supreme Court, where over the next 20 years, that's how long this fight was, he wins not one, but 2 signal victories. Our elections become integrated in 1944, and it paves the way for LBJ, once again in 1965, the same year he signed Medicaid into law, to sign the Voting Rights Act into law that creates the first true multiracial democracy in American history. Now, this woman's question is, that's great, Beto, but that victory wasn't final. In fact, they've torn back all of these rights. 750 polling places have been closed in the state of Texas. That's more than twice the number in the next closest state, and we're the fastest growing state. Guess where those polling place closures have occurred? In the fastest growing black and brown neighborhoods in Texas. In this state, you could use your license to carry a firearm to prove who you are at the polling place, but you dare not use your student ID at Angelo State to prove who you are at the polling place. Now we have these attacks that force you to match the registration, the ID that you used first to register with the ID that you want to use now to mail your ballot in. 95-year-old veteran who first registered to vote 75 years ago can be forgiven for not remembering the form of ID he used 75 years ago. He had his ballot by mail request in Texas this very year rejected 3 times. I don't know if the guy is a Democrat or a Republican. Doesn't matter. No me importa. What matters is that no one has earned the right to vote more than this guy, who was fighting fascism half a world away in 1944 to protect democracy right here at home. Here's the fix. Here's how we get past this. 1, we fix our registration. Today in Texas, you cannot register to vote online. You can in almost every other state, and in Texas, you can do almost any other thing except to do that. We opened up not only online voter registration, but same-day voter registration and automatic voter registration. So when you turn 18, you're ready to go. We reopened those closed polling places, so you no longer see a 6-hour line outside of Texas Southern University, one of our great historically black colleges. Why in the world should anybody wait 6 hours in order to be able to vote for their candidate of choice? Again, don't care if they're Republicans or Democrats, they should be able to do that. What if we replaced, I'm going out on a limb, but Confederate Heroes Day as a state holiday with Election Day as a state holiday, so you can get the day off and use that to vote if you have to stand in a line. We can do this, but in order to do this, and again, it's possible for us to overcome this voter suppression. We know it because we've done it before. Think about Dr. Lawrence Nixon. Think about LBJ. Think about John Lewis, 24 years old, beaten nearly to death, crossing the Edmund Pettus Bridge, forcing LBJ to convene a joint session of Congress to get this done. We've done it before against much greater odds. So when I ask you to canvass with me, to knock on doors, that's the tradition that we're following. We are heirs to that service, to that sacrifice. We're just going to do our part so we can pass it on to our kids. 246 years into this experiment, I want to make sure that we can keep it going for the next 246. Let's get it done in Texas. Thanks for asking the question. Appreciate it.
Hello. Hello, I was wondering if, as governor, if you have any plan for public transportation, like high-speed rail, or making Texas cities more walkable and less car dependent.
Thanks for asking this question. So, I served 6 years on the El Paso City Council, and I learned quickly when I was sworn in that our buses were among the worst in the country. You could not trust them to get you from point A to point B without breaking down. The service, the routes, all of it was terrible. And what made it even worse is that most of the people who rode the bus had no other option. They didn't have a car. This wasn't a choice that they made. This was the option of last resort when you had no other choice. So we made significant investments partnering with the federal government in our transit system. We bought a new fleet of buses. We proposed new lines. We connected more people with their education at the University of Texas at El Paso, or El Paso Community College. We connected more people with their jobs so that they could earn enough to buy a home, pay property taxes, lessen the burden on the rest of us. In other words, not only was an investment in transit great for transit riders, it ended up being wonderful for everyone else in the community, whether it's educational attainment or job achievement or just being able to connect with your family and have some freedom in your life. It paid off for us. Today in our great state, there's $8 billion sitting fallow in the TxDOT account. $8 billion that could be spent on your roads, on your bridges, on your transit systems in our communities to connect more people with their full potential. I want to make sure that however you reveal your genius to us, the business that you start, the jobs that you create, that there are options for you to do it. That means investing in your education. It means investing in infrastructure like broadband internet. And what I understand is that half of Tom Green County still cannot reliably get on high-speed broadband internet today. But it also means making sure that you have options like transit in the state of Texas. Thanks for asking this question. Appreciate it.
Hey, to your left.
Thanks.
We have time for 3 more.
Hello. Sorry, that's loud. So in 2020, the young people turned out in absolute record numbers, the highest it's ever been. And to put it quite frankly, we're pissed off and disenfranchised. There's been no accountability. There has been no changes. In fact, it's gotten worse. So what would you say to the young people who just don't give a damn about voting anymore because it hasn't made a difference?
Thanks for the question. And I'll add to the achievements of those young people in recent elections. 2018, when thanks to David, we had a great town hall meeting at Angelo State. And a lot of young people showed up, right? Some of you were there. Young voter turnout in the state of Texas in that election was up 504%. Young people showed up, and it produced the largest voter turnout in Texas history going back to 1970. I didn't win, but we elected 12 new state House Democrats. We elected 2 new members of Congress, which flipped control of that institution. We saw the power of young people in that election. I mentioned John Lewis earlier, 24 years old. It wasn't through an election, but he compelled the sitting president of the United States to convene Congress to pass the Voting Rights Act through his heroism and his courage. I mentioned that 95-year-old veteran. Well, in 1944, he was younger than John Lewis, landing on those beaches at Normandy, willing to sacrifice his life. At every major turn in this country's history, the advancement that we've made has literally been purchased through the sacrifice and struggle of young people. I think 2022 is going to be no different. So my message to every young person is, if you care about reproductive health care freedom, if you care about your younger brothers and sisters not being shot to death in their classrooms, if you care about us being able to take the lead as the state of Texas in confronting the challenge of climate before it is too late, the only way through, the only way to overcome is by voting. And not just by voting, but by marshaling other young people, wherever we find them, in college campuses, work sites, job training programs, IBEW halls, wherever young people gather right now, we need to be there with them, listening to them and following their lead. I find that there's far more urgency from the young people in this state than from anyone else, probably because they will bear the burden, the consequences of what we do or fail to do more than anyone else. So I make that commitment to you. It's how we're running our campaign, with, by, and for young people. And once in office, they're helping us to set the agenda. They're not the leaders of tomorrow. They're the leaders right now of this moment. Thanks for asking the question. Appreciate it. Yeah.
Okay, so my question is on the safety school support that Governor Abbott is giving us. So I know there's about 17 million in there that will have a team of coordinators will come around and they'll knock on our, not knock, they'll come and check our locks, they'll check our doors. I don't know who's actually doing this. I'm assuming it's private outside of our school district. When you become governor, will you, instead of that, use it to where maybe it can go more towards our mental health? Because honestly, like, we check our doors every day, like, we double check. So there's just some things in there that I'm thinking, well, do we really need to spend all this money on that, on a private company coming in, instead of turning around and using it for the greater good of our students?
Thanks for the question. I don't know if you saw this. Somebody forwarded me something from the governor's office today. Apparently, the state of Texas, through Governor Abbott, has hired Chuck Norris to do a series of public service announcements. This is not a joke. With I think the tagline is something like, if you see something, say something. Now, that's going to help some people sleep better at night. The see something, say something for me is called flag law. If I see somebody doing something that's going to hurt somebody, I want to say something to law enforcement so they can intervene before it's too late. This funding that you mentioned for school campuses, I don't want to diminish the need that some educators, some superintendents, some teachers, some parents, some kids have expressed to us as we've traveled the state. I mean, we've been deep behind the pine curtain in East Texas. We've been up in the Panhandle. We've been in Houston in the 5th Ward. We've traveled this entire state. And sometimes folks will say, you know what, Beto, we need some investment to beef up security at our schools. And I want to listen to people and trust them. You know, there once was a party that believed in this idea of local control, right? Before they stopped allowing local leaders to have control over the decisions that they were making. I'd love to get back to that. And if you see something on your campus that's going to improve safety and security, let's help you out. Let's partner with you from your state government. On mental health care, you know, the day after Uvalde, the governor held that press conference that began with the following words to the parents who just lost their kids the day before. Could have been a lot worse, is what he said. I don't know how much worse it gets than that. The next thing he says is, we have a mental health care issue in Texas, which is also interesting because under his leadership, we have descended to 51st in America, as I mentioned earlier. And then a month before Uvalde, he took out $211 million from our already underfunded mental health care budget to deploy that for these stunts on the border to score political points. 211 million withdrawn from mental health care access. So for those who believe that there is a mental health care dynamic at play here, and there may very well be, yes, let's expand Medicaid. Let's fully fund mental health care. I will not be satisfied until we go from 51st in the nation to first in access to mental health care providers. Let's prioritize kids, families, people who really need it. But if we do all of that and fail to address the fact that these 19 kids were killed by somebody who legally purchased that AR-15, that high-impact, high-velocity round will just destroy. The doctor who responded to that tragedy, I believe, used the word liquefy your organs, the soft tissue inside your system. It is designed to force you to bleed out before we can save your life. If you haven't listened to the audio of the Uvalde shooting, you should listen to the audio. It is painful. It is disturbing. If ever there were a moment to shock the conscience of this country, it is now. As painful, as disturbing as it is, I want you to listen to it because you hear how rapidly that gunfire is going off. I mentioned 23 people killed in El Paso in a matter of minutes in a town that loses 20 people a year. So if we don't do something about the fact that this 18-year-old could do that, I think it is on us at the end of the day. So Republicans and Democrats have all argued that the Uvalde City Council and that mayor, who wasn't so happy that I showed up at that press conference, right? That mayor of Uvalde sent a letter to Greg Abbott calling on the governor to call a special session to raise the minimum age of purchase. That mayor and I may not agree on everything, right? But we found some common ground right there on an issue that is so important to us here in Abilene, here in Uvalde, here in El Paso, here in Texas, the Second Amendment, and also our kids. And yet, does the governor call a special session? No. School year's already started. Those kids are no safer, those teachers are no safer than they were on the last day of school in the last school year. Can he call a special session? Oh, you better believe he can. He called a special session to go after the existential threat of trans children playing sports in our, I know that that's a burning issue in your home and in your life right now. He called a special session to weaken our voting laws because he couldn't get that done in the regular session. He called a special session to address the burning issue of critical race theory. I bet you didn't know that CRT was being taught to your kindergartners. I didn't either because it's not being taught to our kindergartners. But he'd call a special session to distract you from fixing the grid or addressing gun violence or paying our teachers enough so that we don't lose them by the thousands. So if I were governor, I would make sure that that money is put to its highest and best use. I would invest more in mental health care, but I'd make sure that we find the common ground on defending the Second Amendment while improving our gun laws so that we protect the lives of our kids. Thanks for asking the question. Appreciate it.
But to your left, same area. This is going to be my last question.
Thank you. Beto, when you become governor, it's a when and not an if. What can you do about the rainy day fund? Are there restrictions that money can't be used for certain things? And is there some way to open that up? Because there are many needs. We talk about needs in mental health, needs for our veterans and everything. Is there any way that some of the restrictions that are currently on that rainy day fund can be lifted?
Great question. Great question. You put the rainy day fund that she's asking about, the budget surplus, which is a function of no political party, but all of us, our hard work, our success, our effort, and the taxes that we pay up that are received by our state government. We're more than $30 billion in the black that can be used for the purposes that are most important to us. We've mentioned some of them today. I'll start with one that's on your mind, probably it's on my mind as well, especially after we opened our appraisal notices a couple of months ago. The cost to stay in our home or to pass that ranch or farm down to our kids has gone up exponentially in the state of Texas. 40% increase in property taxes since Greg Abbott has taken office. It's $20 billion more that we are collectively paying. I'd make sure that we fund the state services that bring the pressure down at the local level. What am I talking about? Public ed, right now the split is the state pays 40%. Your local community, your trustees who set the tax rate, you the homeowner, you pay 60% of the cost of public education. Back in the good old days, when Democrats were showing up here in Tom Green County, the split was 50-50. State paid 50, you paid 50. The pressure on your tax bill was much, much lower. Good news, there's a Republican from North Texas who's just filed a bill last session to bring that ratio up to 50-50. As governor, I'll sign that into law. To do that, we're going to need to use some of that surplus, perhaps, to make sure that we fund the difference. Other things that we could fund. I mentioned how badly paid the teachers are in this community, $15,500 less than the national average. You spread that off across every teacher in Tom Green County, and then every other underpaid teacher across the state of Texas. That adds up to some real money. It just so turns out that we have some real money in the budget that we can use. 50% of rural Texas, as John Mark will tell us, does not have access to broadband internet. Try finishing your education if you can't get online. Try finding a job, hiring people for your business. If you're single and lonely, try finding a date if you cannot connect to the internet, right? What if the same way that great Democrat, Congressman at the time, Lyndon Baines Johnson, and President Franklin Delano Roosevelt in 1936 invested in the Rural Electrification Administration. They said, we don't care how small your town is. We know the big electric monopolies and corporations, they'll never wire you guys for light because they'll never make a profit off of you. But if you'll form a co-op, and if you'll meet us halfway, we'll come to the table and we'll make sure that your kids can do their homework by electric light, just like the kids in Dallas or New York or London or Tokyo. I've met people who are old enough to have been in the first grade in 1936 when all of a sudden they mattered as much as any other kid anywhere else on the planet. It was transformative for them in their lives. I don't buy that anybody here is no way. So imagine we do that for the kid today who can't apply for college online because he doesn't have access to broadband internet. He might wonder, do I matter in this state because I live in Hemp Hill, Texas, or Childress, Texas, or Quanah, Texas, or a city just outside of Tom Green County? No, we want to make sure that he matters just as much as anyone else. Investing part of that rainy day fund and that budget surplus in this infrastructure will produce a return many times over that initial investment. So yes, we have the resources. We don't lack for them in the state of Texas. We win this election, as you just said, and all of a sudden we'll have the political will to get it done. And won't that be nice? Won't it be nice if we're known as a state that is capable of doing the big things again? Pulling together, unifying, making sure that we don't see one another as our enemies or our invaders, to use the word of the governor, but as our allies, our fellow Texans, our fellow human beings, pull together and get the job done. That's why I'm running for governor. That's why together we're going to win this race. I'm so grateful that you came out here today. San Angelo, thank you so much for always being so good, so kind, so warm to us. Le agradezco. Muchísimas gracias.
We're going to stay and take pictures and say hi if you'd like to join us back here by the Texas flag. The line is going to be to my left. If you can see me waving my hand, Noah's waving his hand. And then we were going to be over here to the right exit. Okay.
The sign's got it.
Okay, go ahead. No, you're good. I want you to get this.
Thank you for coming
Rain, rain, Well, it took my baby.
Yeah, of course.